Hello and welcome. This video is part of a series of online meetings that explains the Regional District of Nanaimo's preparation of new community wildfire resiliency plans in its electoral areas. This presentation is about Electoral Area H. My name is Matt Shields. I'm a registered professional forester working for a company named Diamond Head Consulting that the Regional District of Nanaimo has hired to prepare the plans. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that our project takes place on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, the Snuneymuxw, Snuneymuxw, Qualicum, and relations. So what's in this presentation? First, I'm going to give a brief refresher on what a community wildfire resiliency plan is if you missed our meeting in August. Then I'll talk about our findings on fire risk in your area, Electoral Area H. And then I'll talk about how the community wildfire resiliency plan can support fire smart in your community and what actions are likely to be the most important based on your community's context. So, what is a community wildfire resiliency plan anyways? Community wildfire resiliency plans are adopted by local government, in this case, the Regional District of Nanaimo, and they map wildfire risk around communities and then propose recommendations to reduce that risk. The plans are paid for through provincial government grants, and what you get at the end is a high-level strategy for managing wildfire risk in your community. It looks something like this. So these are excerpts from one of Diamond Head's recent community wildfire plans for the Sunshine Coast Regional District. The plans are meant to be read by the public and will place wildfire risk in your area in the context of the local landscape, your community's values, and historic ignitions. The plans also provide strategic advice to decision makers on how the Regional District of Nanaimo can manage wildfire risk. And in the latter part of this presentation, we'll talk more about what kinds of recommendations the plan can make. Think of the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan as a first step towards building a fire-smart community. It leaves lots of room for the regional district to tailor risk management to local circumstances and interests, and acts as a key to more provincial funding for fire risk management. So our process, it starts with a review of your community's context, its weather, fire history, its natural environment, cultural values, and the like. Then we make a series of site visits to public parks and other lands to assess potential wildfire behavior, validate provincial data, and look at public infrastructure. Then we conduct analysis. So we model wildfire risk on public lands using that collected data. And lastly, we make recommendations. And we're still at the point in our process where we're developing recommendations. So you have any thoughts, questions, or suggestions, feel free to get in touch with us online through the Regional District's Get Involved website, which will be linked at the end of this presentation. Okay, so I won't go through all of the material that will be in the plan, but the background info includes population and area statistics, growth trends, parks, environment and natural landscape, your climate and weather, including climate change. Electoral Area H contains a diversity of communities from seaside to lakeside to mountainside. But something that they all share is they are forest communities. And most residents of Electoral Area H live within an area called the Wildland-Urban Interface. This is the area mapped in orange on the map, determined by the province, that forms a buffer around areas of higher population. And the wildland-urban interface is really important for managing wildfire risk because firstly, it's where most people live and most infrastructure is located. Secondly, it's where homes directly meet forest vegetation. And thirdly, it's where there are the most sources of ignition. So one piece of the background I would like to bring to your attention is the recent fire history of this area. We know that fire is part of the ecological history of most coniferous forests in North America. Before colonial settlement, large natural fires may have occurred as frequently as once every 150 to 200 years in our area. Fire was also used extensively by Indigenous people along the coast to create open meadows for root crops like camas and to support game forage. Pre-colonial fire history is an area of active research. For our project, we considered where locals have told us fires have occurred, and we also looked more closely at data maintained by the BC Wildfire Service. And this map is showing two pieces of that data. So the polygons or shapes are representing larger fires in the province's database, typically larger than 1 hectare. So in this data set, records are available from 1919 to 2020, so the last 100 years. The lighter colors that you can see, those pinky shapes, are fires that occurred before 1950, and these total 42 fires. There have been 10 larger fires since 1950, shown in that rust color. The most recent fires occurred in 2017 and 2018 and are too small to see at the scale of this map. So the second piece of data you're seeing is those red dots, and they show the province's data on smaller fire starts between 1950 and 2020, so the last 70 years. And during that period, there were 319 fire starts reported to the BC Wildfire Service. And of these, 186 spread to surrounding vegetation and had to be actively fought by firefighters. Generally, there have been between 20 to 30 fires requiring action per decade. So what you can see is that almost all large wildfires occurred before 1950. That's the lighter pink areas on the map. The ignitions in recent decades are mostly small fires that were quickly suppressed or burned out due to unfavorable conditions. These are indications that local firefighters are doing a good job of fire suppression as well as advocating for fire safety. I know that human-caused ignitions are a significant concern in your communities, and the stats bear this out. 86% of fire starts can be attributed to human causes and only 5% to natural causes like lightning. Of course, some fires are of unknown cause. Locals have also told us that there are a variety of concerns, including illegal campfires and unattended fires on rural property. So another piece of the background I want to address, climate change. As we know, global greenhouse gas emissions are causing changes in the Earth's atmosphere. And around Western North America, research has shown an increasing fire season length on average. In our region, observed and predicted climate change show we may have hotter, drier weather in the summer and for a longer part of the year. Rainfall is predicted to increase in winter, spring, and fall, and may increase slightly in summer, but likely not enough to offset the effect of warmer temperatures. These changes are likely to support increased wildfire activity. However, in a particular year, fire potential is strongly influenced by the in-season weather, which is difficult for models of climate change to predict. So we can't be certain what the future will look like. In particular, precipitation volumes and distribution have large effects on fire season weather, and these outputs are some of the least certain from standard climate models. Another piece of information we can consider is past climate change. We know that our region has had warm and cold periods since the end of the last ice age. During warm periods, charcoal records show that fire was a more regular occurrence than it is now. Overall, we should acknowledge that risk may increase over time. This is one reason that community wildfire planning is meant to be a cyclical process, repeated as communities and forests change. So one more piece of background I want to talk about, and that's land ownership in our community. So the blacked out areas on the map are private land. As you can see, the majority of our communities are privately owned and public land is a minority. This is especially true south of the Big Qualicum River. Under the terms of our project's funding, we don't assess wildfire threat on private land due to privacy concerns. During our site visits, we look only at public land. And in the next section of the presentation, I'll only show wildfire risk on public land. Because we know much of the private land on the island is forested, it's important to recognize that wildfire risk doesn't stop at a parcel boundary. The abundance of private land in our community affects how we should respond to wildfire risk. Our site visits had a couple of purposes. So the first was to visit forests in the vicinity of homes and communities and make wildfire threat assessments. And I'll be speaking more about this in just a minute. The second was to visit pieces of infrastructure that could be important for emergency response, like fire halls, water infrastructure, and communications towers. And thirdly, We wanted to visit a wide variety of areas to understand the form of development in different neighborhoods. So let's talk more about those wildfire threat assessments. These help to develop the updated maps of wildfire risk. So the backbone of the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan is the wildfire threat assessments and the mapping that we derive from them from our field work in July and August. So the wildfire threat in wildfire threat assessments refers to the potential of a forest to ignite and support fire. Wildfire threat combines three elements: forest fuels, fire season weather, and topography. So wildfire threat is rated for different forests on a scale between very low and extreme. You can think of wildfire threat as being somewhat like a rating of flammability. The threat ratings don't specifically take into account the likelihood of ignition. All forests from low to extreme require a spark before they burn in a wildfire. The relationship between topography, weather, and fire is fairly straightforward. Steeper forested slopes allow more rapid fire spread and intense fire behavior because of the simple fact that hot air rises. Fire at the bottom of a slope is preheating the forest above it, evaporating moisture from the forest and licking further up into tree crowns as it gets a leg up from the slope. For weather, the longer a hot, dry period, the easier it is for a fire to start because more and more of the forest moisture will have evaporated. Winds stoke fire like a bellows and can lead to rapid fire growth. The best weather conditions for a fire to start and grow are on a breezy day at the end of a long, hot drought. Forest fuels, on the other hand, are a bit more complicated in their relationship to fire behavior. When we talk about forest fuels, we are simply talking about the wood, branches, leaves, needles, shrubs, herbs, even soils, and other growing things or biomass that can catch on fire and burn. So there are several traits we use to characterize forest fuels, and I'm not going to deal with each of these in detail. But when making our threat assessments, we look at each of them, these common terms in our forest fuels glossary. So these traits tend to vary at the scale of a forest stand, which is an area of similar forest cover, usually sharing a common origin, such as a wildfire or a windstorm. Concepts like surface fuel, ladder fuel, and crown fuel describe the different parts of a forest and their role during a wildfire. Fuel stratagap and crown closure tell us how far apart these pieces are. Measures of density, like stems per hectare, can be used to assess overall fuel volumes of living, dead, or even downed trees. Tree species also influence fuel characteristics because coniferous trees are broadly more active during wildfire than deciduous trees. But the most important concept in our glossary to understand is the fuel type. So fuel types represent common patterns we see in the other forest fuel characteristics. Every forest in Canada can be described as one of 16 fuel types developed by the Canadian Forest Service. In British Columbia, the BC Wildfire Service has adapted this system to describe BC's great diversity of forests. So to make it through this fuel type discussion, I'm going to provide just 3 notes. And the first is that coniferous trees and forests are more flammable than deciduous. The second is that for conifers, denser forests are usually more flammable than less dense forests. And the third is that forests with a lot of small young trees are usually more flammable than forests with a lot of big old trees. These rules are not absolute, but they give you the basics you need to start looking at forests and fire behavior around your community. So this map is showing you the most common fuel types around electoral area H. We have several. On this map, orange colors are showing you areas of coniferous dominated forest. That's forests of Douglas fir, western red cedar, pine, and other species. The C5, shown in peachy orange, is the most common of the coniferous fuel types. This fuel type represents coniferous forests of moderate density, mostly made up of middle to old-aged trees, particularly Douglas fir. These forests are typically associated with moderate wildfire threat. Next, we have the C3 fuel type, shown in deeper orange, which represents coniferous forests of higher density with more continuity between fuel layers. These fuel types in our area are often relatively young. These forests are typically associated with higher wildfire threat. Pine is more characteristic of these stands in electoral area H, though Douglas fir trees can form them in some cases. We saw several areas around the electoral area where pine was a minority component of C5 stands, which may increase wildfire threat in them. In other areas, shown in light pink and magenta, we find forests all containing at least 25% deciduous trees. And these mixed or pure deciduous forests are often held to have reduced wildfire threat because of the lower number of conifers. Fire behavior in mixed wood stands can vary widely with the proportion of conifers and their distribution. So on that last slide, you heard me use the word typically in relation to wildfire threat and fuel types. And this is because variability within forest fuel types, topography, and the effects of weather all combine to make wildfire threat. Wildfire threat, you'll recall, is a kind of probability that tells us how severe a fire could be under typical fire season weather. So fire rank is a visual classification used by the BC Wildfire Service to help illustrate the kinds of fire that can occur. The higher the fire rank, the less predictable, faster spreading, and more dangerous the wildfire. Beyond rank 3, fires are often too difficult to directly fight with ground crews and must be extinguished by air support or favorable weather. The likelihood of higher rank fires tends to increase with more flammable fuel types and more extreme fire weather. One way of thinking about this is that it is easier, so to speak, for an area of high or extreme wildfire threat to sustain a fire of higher rank than it is for a moderate threat area. Fire of any rank in the interface is capable of threatening homes and public safety if uncontrolled. So, putting it together, the wildland-urban interface is where wildfire threat becomes wildfire risk. And risk is when there is something of value that could burn down because of a wildfire. So how does wildfire threat become wildfire risk? Well, fires have 3 ways of spreading from forests into communities. The first is direct flame. This is when your home is exposed to wildfire by the ignition of its landscaping, yard debris, or other things you have stacked up around the building directly from forest vegetation. Secondly is radiant heat. A fire front can generate a lot of energy, and if your home is within 10 to 30 meters of a forest on fire, the heat from the blaze can be enough to cause materials on your home to ignite. The greatest risk of this occurring is within 10 meters of your home. And third, ember ignition. A fire can send off embers or firebrands that ignite flammable materials well in advance of the fire's arrival. Embers can lodge in crevices in your roof or siding, or ignite landscaping near your home. While embers can travel up to several kilometers ahead of a fire, the greatest risk is within a few hundred meters of a burning forest. So when fires with higher threat ratings are within a few hundred meters of homes, we recognize higher wildfire risk. So the way this looks on a map of your community is shown here. We combined the weather, fuels, and topographic information of wildfire threat with information on the location of homes in the interface to come up with a new map of wildfire threat and high-risk areas. So on this map, you're seeing a number of different colors. The blacked out area remains private land. Light blue is water, typically, or areas with very low wildfire threat. There are some light yellow areas in there that represent areas with low threat. That neon yellow color you see occupying much of the map is moderate, orange is high, red is extreme. And wherever you see a hash, typically on orange or red areas, that represents an area of high risk. So where a forest of higher wildfire threat rating is close to homes. So as you can see, most of the areas of public land in electoral area H is associated with moderate wildfire threat, and consequently, we would say moderate wildfire risk. There are significant areas of high risk, however, and these are mostly driven by those C3 conifer fuel types, those younger, denser conifer fuels. And these are scattered around the electoral area, but there is a significant area southwest of Bowser, and then also smaller patches southwest of Qualicum Bay and in the Spider Lake area. So some key takeaways from that map. So moderate threat is typical on public lands, and moderate risk means many people live in communities where wildfire is possible during extreme fire weather conditions, even if the highest ranked fires are unlikely. Secondly, private land severely fragments the forest landscape, making it difficult to gain a complete picture of the risk environment, and this is especially true south of the Qualicum River. Thirdly, areas of high risk on public land are related to young and dense conifer fuel types for the most part. And although risk may moderate over time as these forests develop into maturity, fuel management could be feasible in some areas to reduce wildfire threat and accelerate forest development. Treatments in many of these areas would need the partnership of the provincial government and forest licensees because the regional district is not the landowner. Lastly, remember, just because something is low risk doesn't mean that fire could never happen there. And likewise, just because an area is high or extreme risk doesn't mean fire will definitely happen there. Fires require ignitions, favorable weather, and fuel. Risk reflects probability, not certainty. In the interface, almost everyone can benefit from thinking about fire smart if they haven't already. So with that in mind, now this part of the presentation talks about things that the Regional District of Nanaimo is considering putting into the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan. The CWRP will make recommendations for the regional district to manage wildfire risk, and these recommendations will follow the 7 disciplines of Fire Smart listed on the slide. So in the next 4 slides, I pulled out some high-level ideas that we're considering for the plans in Electoral Area H. And I've split these ideas into topic areas of education, community planning and development, emergency response, and fuel management. Most of the actions that I'm about to mention are eligible for additional provincial funding if supported by the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan. So in education, public education and outreach play a critical role in helping communities prepare for wildfire by promoting a sense of empowerment and shared responsibility. Recommendations in this section will focus on what the RDN can do to improve awareness of wildfire in the community and increase resources and participation in Fire Smart by members of the public. So the plan will aim to align the regional district with good outreach and organizing around fire prevention already happening in the communities. For example, the regional district could install wildfire awareness signage or educational material in popular park locations, like the Lighthouse Community Trailheads and Horn Lake Regional Park. Popular recreational areas are high traffic, high visibility locations where people are already going to think about forests. This is a good opportunity to connect the dots between forests and fire. Currently, Beauhorn Bay Fire Department has a Fire Smart coordinator who liaises with community members around the electoral area about prevention and preparedness, and also conducts home assessments to help residents understand where risk to their home comes from. The regional district could investigate ways to provide this service for residents outside of Beauhorn Bay Fire Department's service area, perhaps by coordinating a joint grant application for a new Fire Smart coordinator role to act as an overflow outside of the service area for the fire department. Another way the regional district could promote wildfire awareness is by organizing a community cleanup day for wildfire preparedness, typically focused on cleanup of a smaller high-use park or public facility. These community preparedness days are great opportunities to demonstrate Fire Smart landscaping principles to local residents who get hands-on experience identifying and removing problem vegetation. Opportunities of this kind include at areas like Horn Lake Regional Park in the campground, or in the smaller community parks scattered throughout the electoral area. Lastly, the regional district may also be able to partner with the Spider Lake residents who have already achieved recognition as a Fire Smart neighborhood to host a community cleanup event or other initiative in their area. There are also opportunities to learn from this community about how to help neighbors in other areas organize and support Fire Smart neighborhood recognition. So, community planning and development. Community planning and development recommendations address how the regional district conducts its own business, including park and infrastructure management. The regional district could initiate several changes to how communities are planned, ranging from making sure large development proposals are reviewed by local fire departments to large public processes to revise the official community plan. A good place to start may be by ensuring Fire Smart information goes out with every development application. To begin to understand the risk on private land, the regional district could work to incorporate wildfire hazard assessments as required information for large development approvals in interface areas. In the future, with public support, the regional district may be able to update subdivision and development rules so that fire smart building is prioritized. The regional district may also be able to influence wildfire risk in electoral area H through its park management. They could, for example, adopt internal policies to make sure parks, regional district property, and RDN facilities are being constructed and maintained with fire smart materials and landscaping. They could also define a level of service in park management documents for wildfire hazard assessment. For new parkland or property acquisitions, RDN could adopt policy to assess wildfire hazard at or before the time of acquisition or lease. The regional district can also access additional money to conduct fire smart assessments of its critical infrastructure. Lastly, we've heard that community members who want to fire smart their properties are looking for a way to dispose of waste material. The regional district may be able to access additional funding for providing a dumpster or chipper or waive tipping fees for this purpose. Okay, enhancing emergency response. Recommendations in this topic area address how the regional district can integrate wildfire risk into its internal emergency preparedness, while also working with a broad range of community actors. So some examples of recommendations are that the regional district can lead the update of emergency and evacuation plans, ensuring that each are adequate for community and neighborhood size. Internal policy can promote review of the plans when new, large developments take place. And in the long term, the regional district can plan strategically for secondary access to several single access neighborhoods south of Highway 19 and 19A. There may be potential to obtain rights of ways for such routes through future subdivision. The regional district can continue to liaise with local firefighters. During this project, we heard from firefighters that they're interested in seeing additional capacity for fire smart education, as well as updates to the regional district's management of municipal rights of way. The regional district can work with fire departments not currently served by a fire smart coordinator to ensure residents have access to this fire smart resource and are able to quickly and easily get their homes assessed anywhere in electoral area H. Lastly, the regional district can also bring more voices to the table, such as by establishing a working group with local fire departments, the BCWS, the wildfire service that is, the Parks Department, and BC Parks representatives to address priority fuel management projects and potential joint training exercises. So the last topic area, fuel management. In some areas on public land, it may make sense to pursue fuel management. And fuel management is when a professional forester makes detailed site assessments of fuel loading in an area and develops a prescription to reduce components of the forest that are creating risk. These assessments are more detailed and intensive than the data collected for the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan and can be used to model fire behavior and intensity at specific sites. The photos on this slide show a post-treatment condition in Douglas fir forests similar to the forests found in our area. The point being that in most cases, the purpose of fuel management is to keep a forest in place, not to clear cut it. Previously, proposed fuel management in the Oakdown Community Park was curtailed because of community concerns. It's critical to understand that fuel management typically targets smaller or dead trees, not large healthy ones. Fuel management is a tool we can use in some situations to reduce the likelihood of fire spreading towards homes and improve the chances of suppression success. The Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan will identify potential treatment areas on the basis of their wildfire risk rating, site assessments, their proximity to homes, operational feasibility, and potential usefulness. High priority areas for investigation are in the Bowser area, where higher threat is found. Areas not on regional district owned property require the support and partnership of the Provincial Wildfire Service and other organizations. So just wrapping up here, while the planning process is ongoing, you can submit questions and find more information at the RDN's Get Involved page for wildfire resiliency, and that's getinvolved.rdn.ca, and search for wildfire. In the new year, we'll be having an online event to present the highlights of all 7 community wildfire resiliency plans before they go to the regional district board. And we're aiming to have those community wildfire resiliency plans in place by February 2022. So that concludes the presentation, and I hope you learned something about community wildfire resiliency planning and wildfire risk in Electoral Area H. Please get in touch with me or my colleague Caitlin in the Regional District Emergency Services Department. If you have any questions or thoughts, our emails are listed on this slide. You can also connect with us and find more information at that Get Involved page for the project at the URL listed on the center of the slide. Thanks for joining.